India, good evening. It was a day of special connect, a day of camaraderie and bonhomie at the G7 top guns assembled in Hiroshima in Japan. World leaders rushing to rub shoulders with Prime Minister Modi. That proves India's emerging role as a global power player. In his first meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, PM Modi asserted that the ongoing conflict is an issue of humanity and human values. The Prime Minister said that India can do whatever it can for an early resolution. Before we go any further, it is important that we pause and play out the opening remarks of Prime Minister Modi when he met Ukrainian President Zelensky.
पिछले एक डेढ़ साल से हम लगातार फोन पर तो बातचीत करते रहे हैं, लेकिन ग्लासगो के बाद लंबे अरसे के बाद आज मिलने का अवसर मिल रहा है। यूक्रेन में चल रहा युद्ध पूरे विश्व के लिए बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है। पूरे विश्व पर इसके अनेक प्रकार के प्रभाव भी पड़े, लेकिन मैं इसे राजनीति या अर्थव्यवस्था का मुद्दा नहीं मानता। मेरे लिए यह मानवता का मुद्दा है, मानवीय मूल्यों का मुद्दा है। युद्ध की पीड़ा क्या होती है, ये आप हम सबसे ज्यादा जानते हैं। लेकिन पिछले साल जब हमारे बच्चे यूक्रेन से वापस आए, तब उन्होंने परिस्थितियों का जो वर्णन किया, उसमें मैं आपकी वेदना और यूक्रेन के नागरिकों की वेदना भली भांति समझ पाता था, उसका अंदाज लगा पाता था। और मैं आपको विश्वास दिलाता हूं कि इसके समाधान के लिए भारत और निजी रूप से मैं स्वयं, हमसे जो कुछ भी हो सकता है हम अवश्य करेंगे।
Zelensky invited Prime Minister Modi to visit the war-torn country. Not only he asked India to join the Ukrainian Peace Formula initiative, but the Ukrainian president also thanked India for supporting its territorial integrity and sovereignty, in particular at the platforms of international organizations.
In meeting with President Zelensky, Prime Minister of India conveyed India's clear support for dialogue and diplomacy to find a way forward. Prime Minister also said that India will continue to extend humanitarian assistance to the people of Ukraine.
Viewers, this is not the first time when India has pitched for dialogue and diplomacy to diffuse conflict. Prime Minister Modi in the past has stated that there can be no military solution to war. But why is the world placing its bet on India to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict? In a survey by the US-based consulting firm Morning Consult, Prime Minister Modi trumps leaders like Australian Prime Minister Albanese, French President Emmanuel Macron and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in ratings. Modi's global ratings too are the highest for any global leader, with 78%, which makes him an apt figure who can broker a truce between Russia and Ukraine, or at least who's seen as someone who has the potential to broker a truce between the two countries. On that note, let's quickly understand by opening this up, Ashok Sajjanar, former diplomat, Brahma Chalani, strategic affairs expert, Dr. Swasti Rao, associate fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute of and Oleksiy Goncharenko is a member of parliament joining us from Ukraine. Now, good evening to all of you. Professor Chalani, I was talking to you, in the evening we were on a panel together and Ambassador Sibel was also there. And I've basically got a drift of what you think about what's happening at the G7. So please allow me to begin with Ashok Sajjanar. Sir, what do you first of all make of India's participation and in particular Modi's... Sorry, sir?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Yes, sir.
That question is to me, is
exactly, sir. If you could begin by sharing your thoughts on the Modi-Zelensky meet and what does it mean for the world?
Yeah, first I think to give a broader perspective in terms of the invitation to Prime Minister Modi, not only as in terms of the presidency of G20 or in terms of the voice of the global South, but I think as India also, meaning the Prime Minister of India, he represents India. I think India has become a partner of choice for a large segment of the global community. India is seen to be indispensable to seeking solutions to many of the challenges that confront the world today, whether it is in terms of the climate change, terrorism, the pandemic, health issues, peace and security. So coming to your question of the meeting with President Zelensky, as was mentioned, the last meeting was in Glasgow on the sidelines of COP26. And right now, of course, Prime Minister Modi has been in touch with President Zelensky, as has he been in touch with President Putin. Of course, he met President Putin last year in Samarkand in September on the sidelines of the SCO summit. But this is the first meeting with President Zelensky after the war started. India has stated many a times that it is willing to do whatever is required to bring the conflict to a close. But I guess the timing has not been right, because both the sides have really pitched themselves in and have not been willing to look at any sort of compromise solution, because we've seen that President Zelensky's starting point is that there is going to be no loss of territory. And this is completely unacceptable to the other side. So I think the timing has to be right if any sort of mediatory role has to succeed. And this will really have to wait and see. I personally think that we might be coming to such a point when the timing could be appropriate for some sort of a mediatory role to begin. And we'll have to see how to take it forward.
But Ambassador Sajjanhar, when you talk about mediatory role, what does it mean? Are you suggesting that, does it include picking up the phone and speaking to Mr. Putin, asking him to end the war? Or is it more complex than...
I don't think that is how it, how I would visualize it to pan out, because there have been negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in the past also. This will not be the first time. Just after the war started, for a few months, there were interactions between the Russian delegations and the Ukrainian delegations. So I think that is where, it will be the starting point. And after that, we try to take it forward, because at the moment what we see is that Russia occupies about maybe 15 to 18% of the territory of Ukraine. And, this territorial issue is going to become the most intractable issue in getting the two sides together. There is fatigue setting in. Everyone knows that. Everyone realizes that. Both the sides, there is fatigue, even as far as Europe is concerned, the US is concerned. Their economies are also suffering. So there is fatigue setting in there also. So I think the two sides get together. It is not really the question, as you are suggesting, of picking up a telephone. And it will, in my view, not only be India that comes into play. There are other actors also. And possibly this could be a joint effort to bring the two sides together and to take it forward.
Now, Professor Chalani, so far, India's national interests have, dictated our position of formal neutrality. This is for the lack of a better word. What are the factors that we are looking at that compels us to not really walk the talk?
First, only a neutral country can mediate in this crisis. If India was taking sides, India's diplomacy will have little room to play the role of a bridge builder or a peacemaker. So India's neutrality is so critical. It's because of India's neutrality that both the Western camp and Russia are both urging India to play an important role in the Ukraine crisis. But there's a larger issue at play, which is that after 15 months of fighting, it is clear that neither side in the Russia-Ukraine war can win on the battlefield. A negotiated ceasefire is the only way out of the current military deadlock. The war has reached a stalemate. And when the war reaches a stalemate, the only way out is for both sides to explore an armistice agreement, a ceasefire agreement. Now, such an armistice agreement must happen before Russia and China cement a strategic axis against the West, an axis that will leave Taiwan more vulnerable than it is today. It will also undermine America's global preeminence. So it's in America's own interest that the war in Ukraine ends soon. In fact, the RAND Corporation, which is a very influential government-backed think tank in the US, said in a major report in January that a long war is not in American interest. Yet the Biden administration is actually encouraging Ukraine to launch what's been called the spring offensive.
That's right.
Spring in Europe and in North America ends around end of May. So we're just about, towards the end of that spring season. And the offensive hasn't started, but a lot of people expecting Ukraine to launch its offensive anytime soon. But this means that until Ukraine has exhausted its military options, there may be no room for diplomacy. And that puts a player like India in a quandary. So when Prime Minister says that India is willing to play the role of a peacemaker, the fact is that at this particular juncture, there isn't much room to play the role of a peacemaker.
There isn't much room. Let's get in a voice from Ukraine. Member of Parliament, Mr. Goncharenko, now joining us. Good evening, Mr. Goncharenko. Thanks for your time. What do you make of the Modi-Zelenskyy meeting?
That's very good that this meeting happens, and that's India is a very important country for Ukraine, and Indian position for the moment. I can tell you that I think it should be more active, and India is not supporting resolutions in the United Nations against the war. I think this is a mistake, and I think that India can influence more Russia in order them to stop this war. I heard your previous guest, and he said about we need ceasefire quickly, but who more than Ukrainians want peace? We want peace, but we don't want ceasefire. We want a stable peace. And stable peace can be based only on international law and international order. And international law will be respected only when all territory of Ukraine will be controlled by Ukraine, and when Russia will take out their army from Ukrainian soil. After this, we are ready for any negotiations. We want to have peace. But once again, it can be only on the basis of international law.
I understand that position, Mr. Goncharenko. All that I want you to tell me and tell us actually is that what is it that Kyiv expects from New Delhi when you say that India needs to be more active?
I think that New Delhi, like I already told you, in international organizations like United Nations, India can play more active role, condemn the aggression, because this is a clear and justified war from Russia. Definitely, we would like to see how India is joining sanctions against Russia. Probably today it's not possible, but at least to have active international role with diplomatic position, that's something which is possible. Also, India can be a very good way for Ukraine to cooperate and to have a dialogue with other countries of so-called Global South, just to speak with them. With India's support, I think it can be also a very big input of India to the solution of this Russian war against Ukraine.
Okay. Dr. Rao, you've heard a few views here. What's your take? Can India unite a divided world? The world is looking at Prime Minister Modi. I think you're on mute, ma'am. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Am I audible now to
Loud
you?
and clear.
Yeah, all right. Okay. Yeah, very good evening to you. So I was hearing all the panelists here. I just have to make something which is very practical. My comment is going to be very practical. So the way I look at it, I understand that it is a complex war. It was meant to end early. It has not ended. In fact, it is now reaching a kind of a situation where we all fear that it could lead to become a frozen conflict with no end in sight. Now, I think what India can do definitely that, of course, India's stature. I think everybody has made that point, so it doesn't make any sense for me to repeat it, which is that definitely India's stature is important. India's role as the ambassador of the global south, the president of the G20, somebody that you can't really do without today in the world as far as collective action and interest is concerned. So there is no doubt about it. I kind of support it wholeheartedly, and India has reached this point because of a steadfast commitment to neutrality and a very active neutrality. And today, what Prime Minister Modi said to the Ukrainian counterparts was also, I would say, something that made India's position very clear. Now, the question is, how does that happen? And I think this is what we are talking about. In my opinion and understanding whatever I've followed in the war, I do not think that this is the time that any effort for a total mediation is going to work. Please understand that as we are sitting here and talking today, the F-16s have been cleared by the Biden administration. The G7 is mulling a new sanction regime against Russia, and this new sanction regime is going to now target third countries whereby they notice support for the Russian economy and also a lot of other things. Now, the point is that with these kind of parallel developments happening, I do not see any logic to call for total mediation. Of course, in terms of intentions, it's very clear these summits are major platforms where you should convey these intentions, but these are not going to work at this time. In 2023, definitely not. I have said it many times earlier that every single penny for the Ukraine, for the support of Ukraine has already been chalked out. So in 2023, I do not really see any space for a meaningful mediation or negotiation.
Okay, so you're ruling out mediation. You're just being polite about it. You're saying...
No. What I'm saying... No. What I'm saying is that a total mediation strategy is not going to work. I think the countries that are interested in mediation should try to do limited mediation. And when I say limited mediation, I can give you examples like the Turkey grain deal, the one that is mediated by Turkey and the UN. So what we need to do in a war which is so complex and with no end in sight is that not sit hand on hand. We should basically try to identify specific issues around which we can mediate and, deliver results so that
India has underlined its commitment to humanitarian issues. Not once.
No, but then humanitarian, so that's what I'm saying. So the point is that we need to talk about, for example, the prisoners of war, for example, those kind of humanitarian issues and mediate around those issues in order to show some deliverable, tangible result, okay, in terms of what mediation regime can do. So this is perhaps going to give some more legitimacy to efforts to mediation rather than just talking about the grand plans to mediate, because, the truth is that the mediation plans are completely incommensurate at the given point of time. President Zelensky is holding a different kind of a picture, and the Russian counterpart is holding a different
incommensurate,
kind of
and some would also say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they are unrealistic.
Well, yes, that's precisely what I'm saying.
Okay, then let me turn to Brahma Chalani. Professor Chalani, India's tightrope walk on the Ukraine issue, people are calling it strategic ambivalence. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not strategic ambivalence. India is playing its cards cautiously because you don't mediate in a conflict when neither side wants you to mediate, right? You only mediate, you only try to be a bridge builder if both sides are willing to let you explore the possibilities, for example, of bringing about a ceasefire. Unfortunately, what's happening is that the West today is convinced that if and when Ukraine launches its spring offensive, that the tide of the war would turn in its favor. And therefore, there's a major flow of Western weapons to Ukraine in the expectation that this offensive will force Putin to the negotiating table and accept the terms that Zelensky is setting. The reality is that neither side is going to change the course of the war. what we are seeing is a war of attrition. Russia is occupying sizable areas of Ukraine in the east and the south. It has officially annexed those territories. It's not going to withdraw from those territories because now it's in a defensive, offensive position. Its military strategy is to hold on to its occupied territories rather than to expand its areas of occupation. And as we all know, defense is easier than offense. And when Ukraine launches its offense, it's spring offensive. The fact is that first, the Ukrainian soldiers are new recruits. They have to deal with new weaponry from the West.
Okay.
And launching an offensive against a defender is going to be quite a tough proposition. So in military terms, we are looking at a stalemate. And I think the next course of action should be for both sides to explore an armistice. In the current scenario, China is the only country that stands to benefit from a long war. And as far as the US is concerned, the more it gets dragged into the war in Ukraine, the greater the likelihood that China invades Taiwan and America realizes its worst geopolitical nightmare, which is a Sino-Russian strategic axis.
Which is why, and you said this in the evening also, that these countries are not really looking for peace. They want this to, simmer on because it suits their interest. And Ambassador Sajjanhar, when people say that, look, India's position of neutrality is driven only because of our concerns vis-a-vis China and Pakistan, is that a wrong assessment, sir? Or is that practical and the best approach to deal with what we have on our hands?
No, not at all. I think as far as our neutrality in this particular context is concerned is because of our historical and legacy relations with the former Soviet Union and Russia. And that is why, it's also self-interest, it's dependence on the Russian Federation for our armaments, for our spares and supplies. So it is also determined and dictated by national interest, but it's also dictated by geopolitical reasons. I would imagine, when at a time when just very recently we had President Biden going to Kiev and saying that, the United States is going to stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. And similar sentiments are being voiced out of Hiroshima today by the G7. So it is quite apparent that, the West is not willing to succumb to the pressure and, call an end to the conflict just yet. And we have seen similar sort of actions also from Russia and statements coming out of Mr. Putin. I think the hope on the Western side is that like Ukraine was able to launch the offensive late last year in November, and was able to seize significant amount of territory from Russia, which it had occupied, that this offensive would also be able to do something similar. And that is the position which would bring the two to a stalemate. That is why you have all these fresh arms equipment coming from Germany, from US, from UK, from all these sources, so that Ukraine is ready to launch this offensive. We've seen some minor gains that Ukrainian army has been able to make as far as Bakhmut is concerned. But if we look at it, that if Russia is occupying about 15 to 17%, and if Ukraine is able to throw back the Russian forces, and gain back about 5 to 10% from there, I think that will be a point when both the sides can start talking. Of course, Ukraine will continue to stick to its point. And, I have all the sympathy with their position that is what is international law. That is what the UN Charter says. Territorial integrity and sovereignty of nations has to be respected. This is also what India has been saying in the UN Security Council and in the UNGA. So I have full sympathy for their position. But I think we also need to see what are the facts on the ground. So once Ukraine has been able to gain some territory from Russia, maybe that is the time when it has come, the conflict has come to sort of a grinding
But for
halt,
that to happen, there is no definite timeline. And like you said, some countries have said that we will support Ukraine for as long as it rages. And Mr. Goncharenko, what is the situation on the ground? Is there a timeline that you have in mind?
It is not a stalemate, like one of you guests said. Because yes, Ukraine, our counteroffensives last year were very successful. Now we're preparing a new counteroffensive. We believe in our army. We received the best weaponry, or very good weaponry, from our allies. And Russia is a losing side. Russian economy is 30 times less than economy of our allies. 30 times less. So Russia is just a big fuel station of the world. That's all. And they can't afford this war for a long time. Because who are their allies? I heard here about China. Yeah, China is sympathetic to Russia, but they're not sending weaponry to Russia. And China says that they don't want to have problems with sanctions, and their companies don't want to have problems with sanctions. So Russia is really a losing side. And with the time, they will lose everything. So I think for Russia, it's a good moment now to speak. We're ready to speak. We're ready to speak about how Russia is leaving our territory. But we will not speak about how we will give up our territory. We will never accept it.
Dr. Rao, if Ukraine continues to get support in terms of arms and everything else, do we really have a role? Does India have a role?
Well, India would always have a role because, like I said, that no matter how long, the war will have to come to an end. This is my understanding, and this is my sense from all the people that I have been talking to, including all the Europeans that I, closely follow and talk to. And they say that, yes, definitely India will have a role. So, but that's a different thing. I think I would agree with what Ambassador Sajjanhar was just saying in terms of having a more realistic understanding and see that this is a time when, you see that the G7's price gap, for example, has been pretty successful. You definitely see in 2023, the first quarter of 2023, the Russian economy that was doing well in 2022, when the price cap and the oil ban was were announced but not yet introduced. After they have come into effect, you have seen a steady decline in the Russian revenue, particularly the energy revenue, and there has been a 46% decline. So if you look at it from the G7's perspective, they are trying to squeeze, the Russians out of the energy revenues. They are going to ramp up pressure. You have already seen the two weapons that were most politicized. One were the F-16s, the fighters, and the second was the long-range weapons, the counter, strike weapons. Both have now made their way to Ukraine. As far as the training component is concerned, I think a lot of people don't follow it very closely, but the training has been on for many, many months. So it's not that all these modern weaponry is making way into Ukraine and it is going to catch the Ukrainian, soldiers and military officers by surprise. I think the military has been, the training has been on for a very long time. So, looking at it from the G7's perspective, I do definitely, see that there will be more ramping up of pressure on the different energy revenue sources of Russia.
I get the point, Dr. Rao. Before I play out what Prime Minister Modi said about lasting peace at the G7, I want to give the last word on the show to Professor Chelani. Professor Chelani, in 30 seconds or perhaps 1 minute, what can India do to bridge the divide, to end the war, conflict, whatever you want to call it?
Well, when both sides are ready to end the war, India would be able to play a critical role as a bridge builder. Today, President Biden's hybrid war strategy has failed to cripple Russia's war machine. It has failed to bring about Putin's downfall or turn the Russian ruble into rubble, as Biden had vowed in the early stages of the war. But Biden has made one important admission, which is that a negotiated settlement is the only way to end the war. If that is so, better to seek it now than after months or years of more bloodshed and devastation.
Well said. On that note, I thank all of you for joining us. Viewers, before we take a break, in a strong message of peace, Prime Minister Modi unveiled the statue of Mahatma Gandhi in Hiroshima, and this is what he said.
ये नाम सुनते ही आज भी दुनिया थरथरा उठती है, कांप जाती है। G7 समिट की मेरी इस विजिट में मुझे सबसे पहले पूज्य महात्मा गांधी की प्रतिमा का अनावरण का सौभाग्य मिलना, ये अपने आप में एक बहुत ही बड़ा सुयोग है। आज विश्व क्लाइमेट और आतंकवाद की लड़ाई से जूझ रहा है। पूज्य बापू के आदर्श क्लाइमेट के साथ जो लड़ाई है, उसे जीतने का उत्तम से उत्तम मार्ग है।
The News Hour Special Edition.